2009 UN General Assembly, this person is saying these words: "This is a commercial business. Capitalist companies create viruses in order to later produce and sell vaccines. It is very shameful and unethical. Vaccines and medicines cannot be sold. Medicine should be free, but capitalist companies produce viruses and vaccines and want to make money." Topical, don't you think? Let's take a look at this revealing story. Revealing in every sense. Libya. In a very short period of time, we've seen its flourishing and total destruction. How did it happen that a country with a GDP per capita of $14,000, which would be better than in some Western countries, is practically razed to the ground? On the 1st of September, 1969, the famous communique #1 was broadcasted on the Libyan radio. "People of Libya, in response to your own will, fulfilling your most heartfelt wishes, answering your most incessant demands for change and regeneration, and your longing to strive towards these ends, listening to your incitement to rebel, your armed forces have undertaken the overthrow of the corrupt regime, the stench of which has sickened and horrified us all. All the sons of the desert and our ancient cities, our green fields and beautiful villages, go ahead." On that day, the Free Unionist Socialist Officers Movement, led by Muammar Gaddafi, overthrew the king and proclaimed the Libyan Arab Republic. Thus began a new age, which some will call the Age of Prosperity, while others will call it the period of tyranny and despotism. Gaddafi began with the fact that he expelled all international corporations from the country and closed NATO military bases, and he began to build the statehood. From the unification of tribes living in common territories to a modern state, this was the main slogan of the first decade of Gaddafi's rule. But disparate tribes did not need any statehood. Many were not satisfied with the new policy, and opposition forces were growing stronger. To maintain power, Gaddafi turned to his tribe, surrounding himself with loyal people. At that moment, he realized that another way was needed, and he found it, creating a unique and cannot be found anywhere else form of statehood. This is how neither a republic nor a monarchy but the great socialist people's Libyan Jamahiriya appeared, a peculiar mutant between a tribal system and a centralized state. The experiment turned out to be very successful. From the middle of nowhere in a desert, Libya became a state with a very high standard of living. Just look at these figures, which we can only dream of now. Every year the state paid $1,000 of subsidies for each family member. The unemployment benefit was $730. The average salary of a nurse was $1,000. Newly married couples received $64,000 to buy an apartment. For each newborn child, the family received $7,000. Not a bad start for a new unit of society. If someone decided to open a private business, then he received one-time financial assistance of $20,000. At the same time, large taxes and levies were prohibited. Education and medicine were free. Moreover, if someone decided to study and train abroad, this was done at the expense of the state. Also, there was a special network of stores in the country for large families with symbolic prices for staple food. There were no utility bills. Loans for buying a car and an apartment were interest-free. At the same time, the very purchase of a car was paid up to 50% by the state, and it gave 65% of the amount to the self-defense militia. There were also special pharmacies with free dispensing of medicines. Gasoline was cheaper than water, 14 cents per liter. Real estate services were banned in Libya, and counterfeit medicines carried the death penalty. The sale and consumption of alcohol were also banned. Dry law. Before 1969, 3/4 of Libyans were illiterate, and 10% of the population suffered from blindness due to total unsanitary conditions and the almost complete absence of doctors and medical facilities. Gaddafi immediately began building hospitals, libraries, schools, and universities. As early as 1977, the literacy rate in the country had increased to 50%, and by 2009 to almost 90%. What personal qualities should Colonel Muammar Gaddafi have had to create such an oasis from the desert in a fairly short period of time? Well, he wasn't an angel, that's for sure. Much is known about his love of women and luxury, as well as his cruelty and vindictiveness. The history of Gaddafi is full of reprisals against political opponents. For example, in 1978, the leader of the Lebanese Shiites and the founder of the Amal movement, Imam Musa al-Sadr, who arrived in Libya, mysteriously disappeared. Gaddafi could get his political opponents anywhere. It was impossible to hide from him abroad. During the first 25 years of his reign, 8 people died in Italy, 6 in Germany, 5 in Greece, and 3 in Great Britain. Enemies of Gaddafi were killed in Austria, Spain, Cyprus, Lebanon, Malta, Poland, Romania, Saudi Arabia, and France. He destroyed them methodically and cold-bloodedly. Gaddafi was definitely cruel, as, in fact, and all those who play for high stakes on the world chessboard. For example, the United States, with its Guantanamo, the explosion of the atomic bomb and the execution of Saddam Hussein, can hardly be called kind and fair. By properly distributing the oil, Gaddafi established a regime of unlimited power, trampled the political field, and eliminated the slightest possibility of any opposition maturing. And all this against the backdrop of an earthly paradise for himself and his inner circle and some strange form of socialism for fellow citizens. Well, there's also something to tell about the earthly paradise. The exact number of mansions and villas belonging to Gaddafi, scattered around the world, is unknown. According to Libyan media, the personal fortune of the leader of the Jamahiriya exceeded $200 billion. The colonel had a particular weakness for gold. This precious metal was used to make a mermaid-shaped sofa, an AK-47 rifle, a watch, a golf cart, all cutlery, and even a fly swatter found in his house. Gaddafi's private jet, Airbus A340 with a full-size jacuzzi on board, was decorated with silver. Clothes, plastic surgeries in a special bunker, world stars for birthdays, virgin bodyguards, huge money was spent on all this. It got to the point that the colonel took tents with him. Live camels came with them so that the Libyan leader could start every morning with a glass of fresh camel milk. Subsequently, trips abroad with camels became a tradition. One way or another, in order to create what, in the end, came out of Libya. And even in a fairly short time, it was necessary to have very specific human qualities. Well, or not quite human. But this question is rather not for Gaddafi, but in general for the ruling stratum of society in most countries of the world. For example, how to enter the circle of leading intelligence agencies of the world. Gaddafi did it in a rather original way, which, however, an ordinary person will never understand. He began to support the radical left and national liberation movements around the globe. At the same time, the differences between the aspiration of peoples for freedom and terrorism, to put it mildly, were very blurred. Smart people understand that the vast majority of terrorist attacks are not the insane actions of religious fanatics, but carefully planned actions of special services and intelligence agencies of different countries. At that time, Libya provided money and weapons to about 30 extremist organizations, including the Irish Republican Army, the Basque ETA, the Italian Red Brigades, the Japanese Red Army, the West German Red Army faction, the Palestinian group Abu Nidal, and many other. In 1986, there was an explosion at one of the discos in West Berlin, where the US military often dropped in. 3 deaths and 200 wounded. The secret services quickly found the hand of Gaddafi, and years later this information was confirmed. In response, military targets were point-bombed in Tripoli and Benghazi, killing dozens of civilians, of course. Sometime later, in December 1988, a passenger Boeing 747 exploded over the Scottish town of Lockerbie, killing 270 people. After 15 years, in order to lift international sanctions, Libya admitted that its officials were responsible for the bombing of the plane. In September 1989, a UTA 772 flight from Brazzaville to Paris crashed into the ground, and 179 people died. In the same situation, the same 15 years later, in 2003, Gaddafi announced his decision to pay compensation to the victims of the tragedy, emphasizing that he didn't consider his country responsible for the attack. Our dignity is important to us. We don't care about money. The Lockerbie case is already over, and the UTA case is now closed. We are opening a new page in our relations with the West. It is believed that the bombings of the planes were organized by the Libyan intelligence services on the orders of Gaddafi, as revenge for the bombing of Tripoli and Benghazi. These are the actions of a man who came to power at the age of 28 as a result of a coup and was able to hold this power for more than 40 years, until the 7th decade. Few people in the world political arena have succeeded in it. But what, in fact, was Gaddafi's major crime, which the Western powers couldn't forgive him anyway? Gaddafi seized a very ambitious goal to strengthen the African countries as a whole. He had the nerve to propose the idea of stop being a post-colonial appendage of the West to the African states. He wanted to change the fate that the United States and major European players had long prepared for these countries. And what is the most unpleasant, he took concrete steps in this direction. The dollar-based monetary system had swallowed up all the countries of Africa, taking advantage of their natural resources such as oil and minerals. To change this deplorable situation, Gaddafi planned to introduce the golden dinar as the main currency. Colonel Gaddafi had a global plan to create a strong union of African states, which would be based on this new economic system. The colonel offered this advantageous alternative to the Islamic states of Africa primarily, but at the same time, he gave the opportunity to join the union to all the other African states. The next seditious step that Gaddafi wanted to realize was to free his oil market from the dollar. Under the US OPEC agreement, since the 70s of the last century, Libya has been trading oil in dollars, which, of course, was beneficial to the Western parties to the agreement. Had Gaddafi done this, he would have been followed by other African and Middle Eastern oil and gas producers. Gaddafi's new plan meant the creation of an entirely new African banking system that would be independent of Western, French, and British central banks. The West would hardly have taken such a hit to its system. Therefore, the world elite couldn't let this happen in any form. There was another reason, also related to resources, but not to oil. Libya, Egypt, Chad, and Sudan are floating countries. They stand on a huge array of porous Nubian sandstone with an area of 2 million square kilometers and a thickness from 140 to 230 meters and huge reserves of water. The Libyans came across this happiness quite by accident. They discovered water in 1953 while trying to find sources of oil. Only a couple of decades later, with the advent of Gaddafi, the citizens realized that a real treasure had fallen into their hands. Gaddafi began to implement one of the most ambitious projects in the history of irrigation systems. The colonel called it the Great Man-Made River. The construction of this large-scale structure could turn arid Africa into a flourishing continent. This is what Gaddafi was aiming for. First, under his strict guidance, a project for a complex network of pipelines was developed. Their task was to deliver water from the Nubian aquifer to the arid regions of the country. Further, specialists from South Korea were invited to Libya, and they brought with them the most modern technologies of that time. Then, a plant for the production of reinforced concrete pipes with a diameter of 4 meters was launched in the city of El Bureka. On the 28th of August, 1984, construction of the pipeline began, which since 2008 has been considered the largest irrigation project in the world. And this is even in an unfinished state. The plans of Gaddafi were not only the water supply of the country's cities. In the future, it was expected to cultivate and irrigate hundreds of thousands of hectares of land. And besides Libya itself, to include other African countries in this system. What would happen in the end? Africa wouldn't only cease to be an eternally starving continent, and it would become an exporter of agricultural products. The Western countries could not allow this anyway. After all, many of them were engaged in the supply of food to African countries, and it was completely unprofitable for them to transform Africa from a consumer into a producer. In addition, the rest of the world had long experienced a serious shortage of fresh water. Almost 20 years ago, back in 2003, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan declared that 2 billion people are in desperate need of fresh water, and also that, according to the World Bank, by the middle of the 21st century 40% of the world's population will experience water shortages, and 20% will suffer badly from it. It turned out that the possession of water automatically brought the Libyan leader among the leaders on a planetary scale. At a solemn event dedicated to the completion of one of the stages of the construction of the Great Man-Made River, Muammar Gaddafi said prophetic words. Now, after this achievement, US threats against Libya will double. The Americans will do everything to ruin our labors and make the people of Libya oppressed. And as soon as mid-February 2011, mass anti-government demonstrations began in the country, which quickly escalated into an armed conflict between government forces and the opposition. In March, a military invasion of Libya began by the forces of the international coalition, which included NATO countries. In late August, with the support of NATO aviation, opposition forces occupied the Libyan capital of Tripoli. Everything went according to the scenario, which had already become boring. Further, an independent strong leader was to come as if from nowhere. With the help of the armed forces, he had to restore order in the country and create a state with a democratic facade convenient for the West. But something went wrong. After the fall of the regime of Muammar Gaddafi, the country actually broke up into several territories controlled by different groups. It was after the overthrow of Gaddafi that international terrorists rushed into Libya on a massive scale. Their influence on the internal political situation in the country continued to grow. The most terrible consequence of the civil war in Libya was the death of several tens of thousands of people. A huge number of ordinary residents of the country lost their homes and began to migrate to neighboring countries and to Europe at the risk of their lives. By destroying the system that Gaddafi had created, Western democracy did not get quite what they expected. But no one is going to admit their mistakes. After all, the main message was still conveyed. The world has no right to change against the will of those who call themselves the elite. This Libya issue, of course, is far from being exhausted. But there's never enough time. Therefore, we're done here. Let me know in the comments, maybe we've missed something in this video, or do you think that the point is totally different? Thank you for watching and see you on our channel.